When I saw my son's wife standing by the kitchen window, laughing softly into her phone, I remember thinking how beautiful she looked. The afternoon light caught the edge of her cheekbone, the gold in her hair, and for a brief second I thought, she really is good for him. I didn't know then that the person on the other end of that call wasn't my son. It started like any ordinary Sunday, the kind that smelled like baked bread and lemon polish, the kind I lived for. David had come home for lunch, like he always did. He was my only child, the kind of man who still called his mother every other day, even after moving across town. And Alana, his wife, had slipped easily into our family. She called me Mom, brought over her famous cinnamon rolls every Christmas, and never missed a birthday. They'd been married just under a year. I still remembered the wedding. Small, tasteful, intimate. She'd worn a simple satin gown and carried white lilies, the same flowers I'd had at my own wedding. My husband, Charles, used to say she had an old soul. He passed 2 years before David got married, and sometimes I like to imagine he had sent her to fill the silence he left behind. That day, I was stirring soup on the stove when Alana came in. She looked radiant, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked. She jumped a little, clutching her phone. "Oh, yes, Mom, just chatting with a friend." I didn't think much of it. She was young, after all, and we all needed our private moments. But something in the way she tucked her phone behind her back stayed with me. Later that afternoon, David arrived, cheerful, as always, carrying a bouquet of tulips. "For you," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "Always my thoughtful boy," I said, placing them in a vase. We sat around the table, the three of us, talking about work, the new neighbors, the usual things. But every so often, Alana would glance at her phone. Once it buzzed, and she turned it over, face down. David didn't seem to notice. He was too busy telling me about his best friend, Aaron, a boy I'd known since he and David were in kindergarten. The two of them had been inseparable. If David was the sun, Aaron was the steady moon orbiting him, loyal, dependable, and kind. "Aaron's coming to the barbecue next weekend," David said. "He's back in town for a bit. You remember him, right, Mom?" "Of course I do," I said. "How could I forget? That boy practically lived here when you were kids." Alana smiled, but her eyes flickered. Just for a second. I saw it. The tiniest shift in her expression, like a shadow passing over her face. It was gone before I could place it. The week passed uneventfully. I tended my garden, went to church, kept myself busy, but small things started to tug at me, like loose threads. Alana seemed nervous whenever Aaron's name came up. When David mentioned him one evening over dinner, saying how excited he was to catch up, she dropped her fork. "Clumsy me," she laughed, brushing it off. Then when the barbecue day came, she almost begged off going. "Not feeling well," she said. "It must be the heat." I insisted she rest, but something didn't sit right. David, oblivious, left early to pick up Aaron. I stayed behind, helping Alana with a few dishes. She was quiet, her movements slow, deliberate. "Alana," I said softly, "is everything all right, you and David?" Her hands stilled in the sink. She didn't look at me. "Of course, Mom. Why would you ask that?" I hesitated. "You just seem distracted lately." She turned then, finally meeting my eyes. There was something unreadable in her expression. "I promise everything's fine," but her voice cracked on the last word. That evening, the backyard filled with laughter, music, and the smell of grilled food. The air was warm, golden with sunset. David and Aaron stood side by side, flipping burgers and laughing like they were 12 again. When Alana finally came out to join us, I could tell she'd been crying, though she'd tried to hide it under light makeup. Aaron looked up the moment she stepped outside. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat too long, they didn't look away. It wasn't the look of two people meeting after a long time. It was something else, something deeper. I felt it in my chest, a quiet dread. Throughout the night, I watched them. Every glance, every pause, every small touch. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Mother knows when something isn't right. When David wrapped his arm around Alana's shoulders, she stiffened ever so slightly. And Aaron, he looked away, quickly. I didn't say anything that night. But when everyone had gone home, when the dishes were done and the lights turned off, I sat in my armchair with a cup of chamomile tea and tried to make sense of what I had seen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining it. But I'd seen that look before, the kind that carried history. And deep down, I already knew the truth. A few days later, I got my answer. I had gone to the grocery store early, and on my way back, I passed by Aaron's house. He had just moved back into his old place, his parents' home. I saw a car parked in the driveway, Alana's car. For a long moment, I sat there at the stop sign, my hands trembling around the steering wheel. Maybe she was visiting. Maybe she was dropping something off. But then I saw them, through the front window. They weren't talking. They weren't arguing. They were standing close, far too close, her hands on his chest, his head bowed as if he couldn't bear to look her in the eye. My heart sank. And in that moment, I understood that my son's marriage, the one I'd prayed for, celebrated, nurtured, was built on a lie. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every laugh, every family dinner, every moment I thought they were happy. How could I tell David? How could I destroy his world again? Because once upon a time, I'd had to do the same thing. When Charles had his affair years ago, I was the one who tore open the truth. I'd seen the pain it caused, the way trust shatters like glass, never quite the same after. I'd sworn I'd protect David from that kind of heartbreak. But here it was, creeping right through my door. The next morning, I tried to carry on like nothing had happened. I watered the plants, folded laundry, made breakfast. But my thoughts were heavy, circling like crows over something dead and unburied. David called around noon. "Hey, Mom, can we come by tonight? Alana's been wanting to see you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat went dry. "Of course, sweetheart," I finally said. "Dinner's at 6. After we hung up, I stood there for a long time, the silence pressing down on me. I wanted to believe maybe I was wrong. Maybe what I'd seen at Aaron's house wasn't what it looked like. But a mother's instinct rarely lies. So I decided to find out. When they arrived that evening, everything seemed normal. David looked relaxed, happy even. Alana was smiling again, though her eyes darted toward me every few minutes. We sat around the table eating chicken and rice, the kind David had loved since he was a boy. He talked about work, upcoming projects, and how Aaron might join his firm soon. That last part made my stomach twist. "Oh, really?" I said, forcing a calm tone. "That's nice. It must be good having old friends close again." "Yeah," David said, oblivious. "We've been through so much together." Alana nodded but didn't say a word. Her fork just traced circles in her food. When I stood to refill the teapot, my hand brushed hers on the table. She flinched, just slightly. That tiny movement said more than words ever could. After dinner, David went out to the garage to grab something from his car, leaving the two of us alone. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the silence. "Alana," I said softly, "we need to talk." She looked up, startled. "About what?" "You know what," I said. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her shoulders dropped. "Oh, God," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. I waited. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red. "You saw us, didn't you?" "I did," I said quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I swear I never meant to hurt anyone. I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself. Then tell me the truth, Alana. What exactly is happening? She hesitated, then took a deep, trembling breath. Aaron and we were married for a few months, years ago. The words hit me like cold water. Married? I repeated. You were married to Aaron? She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. It was quick, impulsive. We were young and stupid. He left for a job overseas and we never told anyone. It ended before David and I ever met. I felt the air leave my lungs. Does David know? Her silence was answer enough. Why didn't you tell him? I asked, my voice trembling. Because he'd never forgive me. It was over. It didn't mean anything anymore. Aaron promised we'd keep it buried. I took a step back, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down. You kept it buried, but you didn't bury your feelings. She shook her head, panicked. No, it's not like that anymore. I love David, I do. But when Aaron came back, everything I thought I'd forgotten just... She broke off, covering her mouth. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear my late husband's voice in my head, the same kind of excuses, the same trembling guilt. The past always finds its way back, no matter how deep you bury it. Just then, we heard the door open. David's voice floated in from the hallway. You two conspiring without me, he joked. Alana quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. Just girl talk, she said weakly. I turned away before he could see the tears gathering in my own eyes. That night, after they left, I sat by the window long after dark. The moonlight cast long shadows across the living room, and the ticking of the clock seemed louder than ever. How could I protect my son without shattering his world? If I told him the truth, it would destroy him. If I didn't, it would destroy me. The next few days were a blur. Alana stopped answering my calls. David seemed happier than ever, blissfully unaware. And then one Sunday afternoon, fate decided for me. I was in the backyard pruning my roses when I heard voices through the open kitchen window. David and Alana had come over again, but they were arguing. It started soft, just whispers. Then it grew louder. You promised me, Alana. David's voice cracked with disbelief. You promised me you'd tell me if there was anything I needed to know before we got married. I was scared, she cried. I thought if you knew, you'd never look at me the same way again. What about Aaron? What about the fact that my best friend was your husband? The pruning shears fell from my hands, clattering against the stone path. He knew. Somehow, he knew. When I stepped inside, David was standing in the middle of the kitchen, his face pale, his hands shaking. He turned to me. Did you know, Mom? There it was, the question I'd feared most. I couldn't lie. Yes, I whispered. His face crumpled. How long? Just a few days, I said. I didn't want to tell you until I understood. Understood what? That my wife lied to me? That my best friend betrayed me? Alana reached for him, but he stepped back. Don't, he said sharply. Don't touch me. I watched him walk out the door, not in anger, but in quiet devastation. And in that silence, as Alana sank to the floor, I realized the truth wasn't the only thing that could break a family. Sometimes love itself did the breaking. The following week was the longest of my life. David stopped answering my calls. He didn't come by after work like he used to. I'd catch myself glancing at the driveway around dinner time, listening for the familiar sound of his car, only to be met with silence. When your child is hurting, the silence feels heavier than any words. Alana came once, on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked smaller somehow, like the truth had shrunk her spirit. Her eyes were swollen, and her hands shook as she clutched a mug of tea I'd made her. I didn't think it would go this far, she whispered. I just wanted a normal life. I loved Aaron once, but David was different. He made me feel safe. I thought the past didn't matter anymore. I studied her face, the same one that had once lit up our family dinners with laughter and felt a strange mix of pity and anger. "Secrets have a way of mattering," I said softly, "even when we convince ourselves they don't." She nodded, staring down at the tea she wasn't drinking. "I'm going to leave him," she said finally. "He deserves better." The words should have comforted me, but they didn't. They only made the emptiness deeper. Later that night, David came by. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his usual confidence replaced with quiet grief. He didn't knock, he just opened the door and walked straight to the kitchen table, sitting in the same chair he used as a teenager. For a while, he didn't say anything. I just poured him some coffee, the same way I always did when he needed to talk but couldn't find the words. Finally, he spoke. "She told me everything." His voice was flat. "About Aaron, about the marriage, about how they ended it." I said nothing. "He went to see Aaron," he continued, eyes fixed on the coffee cup. "He didn't deny it. Said it was years ago, that it didn't mean anything." He looked up then, and the raw pain in his eyes nearly broke me. "Mom, how could he do that to me?" I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. "Because some people," I said slowly, "confuse love with ownership. They hold on to pieces of others even after they've let them go." He squeezed my hand and his voice trembled. "I feel like a fool. Everyone knew how close we were. He was like a brother." "No," I said gently. "Brothers don't do that. But sons heal. They rebuild." He stared at me for a long time, tears threatening but not falling. "Do you think I'll ever trust again?" I smiled sadly. "You will, but you'll do it slower and wiser, and that's not a bad thing." For a few weeks, life went quiet. David moved out of the apartment he'd shared with Alana. He threw himself into work, long hours and empty dinners. Aaron tried to reach him, but David blocked his number. Still, word gets around in small towns. I heard whispers, neighbors talking, people asking questions. Everyone always asks when a picture-perfect couple suddenly disappears from sight. I didn't answer their questions. Some truths aren't meant for gossip. But fate has a strange way of pulling secrets into the light. It was a warm Saturday evening when everything came to a head. Our church was hosting its annual summer potluck, a tradition in our neighborhood. I hadn't planned on going, but David wanted to show he wasn't hiding, so I went with him. When we arrived, the air buzzed with chatter and laughter. Children ran around with paper plates, and the smell of barbecue filled the park. Then I saw them, Aaron and Alana, together. She stood a few feet away, wearing a simple yellow dress, her hand hovering awkwardly near her side. Aaron was talking to someone from work, pretending not to notice us, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. David froze beside me. I could feel his pulse through my hand. It was trembling slightly, just like it used to when he was a boy and tried to hide that he was scared. "Let's just go," I whispered. But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped forward, slow but deliberate. The crowd seemed to part without knowing why, as if the air itself could sense what was about to happen. When he reached Aaron, the two men just stared at each other. No yelling, no fists, just a long, heavy silence. Then David spoke. "You had every chance to tell me the truth, every single one, and you didn't." Aaron's face flushed. "It was over, David. It didn't matter anymore." He shook his head. "It mattered the second you stood beside me at my wedding. It mattered every time you called me your brother." His voice didn't rise, but it carried, a quiet, cutting strength that made people stop and listen. Alana started to cry. "Please," she said, "not here." David looked at her, and for the first time, I saw no anger in his eyes, just sorrow. "You could have told me. You could have trusted me with the truth." She reached for his hand, but he stepped back. "I forgive you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I can't stay in a life built on lies." And with that, he turned and walked away. People whispered for weeks after that night. Some said David handled it like a saint. Others said he should have made a scene. But I knew better. He didn't walk away to protect his pride. He did it to protect his peace. That kind of strength doesn't come from rage. It comes from knowing the difference between justice and vengeance. In the months that followed, David began to heal. He started volunteering at a youth center, helping young men who'd been through heartbreak or betrayal. He told me once, "If I can keep one person from losing themselves like I almost did, then maybe it was all worth it." And as for Alana, she moved out of town quietly. No drama, no farewell. I heard she took a job at a clinic in another state. I wished her peace too. Because peace doesn't come from punishing others. It comes from finally forgiving yourself.
It's been over a year since that summer. Sometimes when I pass by the park where everything unfolded, I can still see the faint echo of that evening. The laughter that fell quiet, the stillness that came after truth had done its work. People say time heals all wounds, but that's not true. Time doesn't heal, it teaches. It softens sharp edges, gives you room to breathe, and helps you see what mattered most in the storm. David still visits on Sundays. We have coffee on the porch like we used to. He talks more now, not about what he lost, but about what he's learning. "Mom," he said one morning, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug, "I used to think love was about never leaving, but now I know love is about showing up honestly or not showing up at all." I nodded, proud but quiet. I told him, "You sound like your father." He smiled. "You always say that when I've done something right." And I had to laugh. Because it was true. That fall, Aaron came to see me. It was unexpected. A gray afternoon, the kind that made the house smell faintly of rain and old wood. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, defeated. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated but stepped aside. "Just for a moment," I said. He nodded, removing his cap like he used to when he was a teenager hanging around our kitchen. He didn't sit. He stood there, shifting from foot to foot, his voice low. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. To you. To David. To everyone." I studied his face. The boy who had once been like family to me, now just a man who'd lost his way. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need to say it anyway. I let him speak. I didn't interrupt. I could feel his regret. Heavy, tangled, but real. When he finished, I said quietly, "I don't hate you, Aaron, but I hope you understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I do." Then he turned to leave, and I never saw him again.
When I look back now, I realize that life doesn't always unfold the way we imagine it. We raise our children hoping they'll never be hurt, that love will be kind to them, that loyalty will always be returned. But life has its own way of teaching lessons, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through grace. What happened between my son, his best friend, and that young woman was a storm none of us saw coming. But in every storm, there's something to be learned about honesty, forgiveness, and the quiet power of letting go. If I've learned anything, it's this. Truth can shatter what was once whole, but it also clears the ground for something stronger to grow. When secrets are buried, they rot the roots of love. But when truth comes to light, even when it burns, it makes room for healing. I used to think protecting my son meant shielding him from pain, but I've come to see that real protection comes from truth, from giving our loved ones the strength to face it and survive it. Today, David's smile is lighter, his heart is open again, and every time I see him laugh with Claire, I'm reminded that even broken hearts can find their rhythm again. So if you're listening to this, wondering whether to hide a truth or face it, ask yourself this: will silence protect love or poison it? Because sometimes the most painful truth is still kinder than the prettiest lie. Would you have done what I did? Stayed quiet until the right moment? Or told the truth right away? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories from the heart.